Howdy, folks, and welcome to the Daily Coin. And my name is Rory, and today is Monday, August the 17th, 2015. And I'm very happy to have back on the line in very short order is Mr. Jeff Nielson from Bullion Bulls Canada. How you doing, Jeff?
Doing great, Rory, and I appreciate you making some time for me today. There's definitely some important things to talk about, and so I'm glad to get the chance to do it.
Well, I'm really glad that we're able to make this happen. I want to start with something that the events of last week with the devaluation of the yuan by the Chinese, and you, along with Alistair McLeod, and I believe there was one other commentator, analyst, that tied the IMF snubbing China on joining the SDR as being a possible catalyst for the devaluation of the yuan. And if you wouldn't mind just sharing your thoughts on that with the audience.
Sure. Well, I think the particular theory to which you're referring was put forth by Alistair McLeod and Hugo Salinas Price. I just remembered the other name myself.
Thank you.
And basically, their thesis was that China is looking to revalue gold in the immediate future. And so what they wanted to do was make it a two-part process. First of all, of course, uh, they devalued their currency. And according to this hypothesis, the idea was if you're going to revalue gold higher, you first revalue the currency lower to get, valuation levels at a level you're comfortable with, and then you make the announcement on gold. And of course, in further support of that hypothesis, we had China's two announcements of increased gold reserves. And now, I've noted that, but for myself, I look at this as something even beyond just merely looking to revalue gold. And so I came out with a commentary referring to what's going on right now as "quote unquote" a gold war, because for me, if you look closely at these events, there's even greater significance than what was put forth by Mr. McLeod and Mr. Price.
They're really, really pissed off about the fact that the IMF snubbed them on getting in the SDR.
Well,
That there's much more to it than what we know here in the West.
and no doubt that was a deliberate snub. And of course, it's
Yes,
also a stalling tactic. It's an obstacle they can stick in front of China to slow down the inexorable path for the renminbi to take over from the dollar as reserve currency. So, we have, of course, publicly all of the Western bankers and Western governments, claiming that they're on board with this transition. We have the UK issuing bonds denominated in renminbi. We have Canada doing currency swaps to get rid of its dollars and take on more renminbi to start doing that, trades in renminbi. And so, overtly, it looks like the West is, cooperating with this transition to China taking over as reserve currency. But then, of course, when you see, actual opportunities to test their cooperation, we see what they did with the SDR, which is throw a roadblock in front of China.
exactly.
And then of course, we also have to bring in what's happened in China's economy, which is the mysterious bubble that sprang up out of nowhere, and went straight up for 6 months and now has come crashing down. And of course, this occurs in a world of market manipulation. And then immediately after this crash, we have China now publicly announcing that it suspended dozens of accounts of US traders, and it's investigating those traders for manipulating its market using computerized trading algorithms.
Yep.
And of course, for me, this is further confirmation of what I've been, banging the drum about for a couple of years now, which is that all of our markets are being manipulated by these trading algorithms. Essentially, there's a single master algorithm that controls all the markets. It marches them up and down like yo-yos. I knew that had to be the case because it's the only possible explanation as to how our markets can move in such an impossible manner, because markets are like a herd of cats. They go all different directions, and that's how they normally behave. What we see our markets go up and down all together, every hour, every day, every month, every year. It can't happen. So, we know the markets are manipulated. We know the banksters went to China, created a bubble, crashed the bubble to disrupt China's economy. China's called them out on that now publicly. And of course, now in that context, we have the currency devaluations and the China's gold announcements. And for me, this just speaks to something much, much bigger.
Much bigger. And it'll be interesting to see once they get into their investigation how they handle it, because in the past they've not been very kind to people that have gotten in and messed with their markets. I mean,
Would
they've actually taken them out back and treated them the way that they should be treated, which is to end their life.
Yeah,
Period.
and wouldn't that be something if
Wouldn't that be
China
something?
executed a few Western bankers? Wouldn't that send a message to not just the U.S. but the whole world? Because of course, I don't know if you've covered this before, but I've certainly mentioned it in my own work after I saw somebody else discuss this. And this is the fact that for a large part of our history, serious financial crimes were given the death penalty.
Well, they should be.
And it will exactly because somebody murders someone. Well, that's definitely a tragedy. That's one life that's been snuffed out. But somebody commits one of these mega crimes that these bankers are committing, and they can destroy thousands of lives, millions of lives. They can create literally hardship for billions. I mean, these are the worst crimes, literally the worst crimes that are being committed on the planet today. They deserve the worst punishment.
Well, I mean, I have several images on my site that I have these criminal banksters as committing crimes against humanity, and I've got one of the IMF that says that IMF committing crimes against humanity since 1943. I mean, and that's the bottom line. They are crimes against humanity when you are a financial terrorist and you go in and you financially ruin people by the thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions. That's a crime against humanity. They should be dealt with accordingly. Period.
Absolutely. And of course, the other thing we have to mention is with our governments deliberately expanding the definition of their boogeyman word terrorism to encompass almost everything. The one thing they've scrupulously avoided is linking the word terrorism to financial crime.
Exactly.
Gee, isn't that strange? Isn't that strange?
Well, no, it's convenient.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness! And you wanted to discuss gold, or is that where we're at right now?
Yeah, well, there's so much going on here. It's kind of hard to stay focused. But
It really is.
let's get back to the gold because, of course, this was the main reason I was hoping to get back, and appear with you today is to discuss China's second gold announcement.
Okay.
Because, of course, we had the first disclosure of gold, and I was fortunate enough to get a chance to do a clip with your colleague Sean, and we had a chance to talk about that. And I explained to readers during that clip that this first declaration, the 600 tons that China disclosed a few weeks ago, this was a voluntary declaration that it was not required to do. And the reason for this is because clearly this was gold that China had already added from domestic sources. It's massive domestic gold mining industry. And the rules of financial transactions dictate that governments do not need to report internal transactions. They only need to report international financial transactions. And of course, here it's important that all of your audience clearly understands that gold is money. It's always been money, even when the bankers were lying to us all those years and calling it a quote unquote a barbarous relic. It has always been money in all of our international financial rules. So when gold moves across borders and changes jurisdictions, those transactions must be reported in a timely manner within the monthly reporting period for those financial transactions. But when nations add gold to their reserves from internal sources, it never has to be disclosed. Such disclosures are totally voluntary. So, all of these insinuations that China's been illegitimately hiding its gold reserves are just a bunch of crap from people who don't understand the way the rules work. China's been doing nothing illegitimate at all. It made a voluntary disclosure of 600 tons of gold a few weeks ago, and most likely did that to simply bump up its gold reserves to keep pace with the increase in the size of its economy. But now we get to China's second announcement, and now we see something totally different, and in my mind, even more significant. So China announces just last week that it had added another 19 tons or so of gold.
Yeah, small amount.
Exactly. And we know several things absolutely for sure just because of the specific size of that announcement. First of all, we know this was not a voluntary disclosure. There'd be no point in doing it. China discloses it has an extra 600 tons of gold. Then a few weeks later, it voluntarily adds, it's got another 19. 19? What's the point? There's no point at all. So, there's no reason to report voluntarily an additional 19 tons. So we know this must be a mandatory disclosure, and that in turn implies that China was buying this gold on the open market. And this is what is so significant, because this is something that China has not done, at least in any official manner, in at least 6 years. And so now when we put the two gold announcements together, we get a very clear picture. China decides that it's going to announce an increase in its gold reserves from what it's already holding, and at exactly the same time, it starts buying gold aggressively on the open market for the first time in at least 6 years. That's the gold that was just disclosed last week. It had been buying gold day after day after day on the open market, and now the monthly reporting period's come to an end, and it's reported that extra gold. So China did these two things concurrently. It made the announcement of voluntary disclosure of more gold, and it began aggressively buying gold on the open market at the same time, like Russia's been doing for, of course, several years now.
Yes.
So this is, in recent years, totally unprecedented for China. And for me, it shouts out gold war.
That is, I hadn't thought about that, but that makes perfect sense. So now we'll probably start seeing on a month. Do you think that that's what's going to happen? Is that each month during the monthly reporting that China's going to show an increase?
Well, this is my suspicion, but of course, it's going to be tested really quickly. Are we going to see another declaration 4 weeks from now? If we do, then that's unequivocal. Then
yes.
That's almost a formal declaration of war in the gold market.
That would be it.
But of course, then this begs the question: why? Why today? Why, after everything that's been going on for all these years, why was China pick this particular time to, quote unquote, go to war in the gold market? And of course, we've already talked about that previously. So, I'm sure you already figured that out yourself. But for the rest of your audience, the answer to that question, in short, is India. And here, people need to understand that, the bankers have been showing extreme concern about Indian gold demand and how it's been cramping, their own dwindling reserves for several years now. And it, of course, pressured India to impose a gold embargo on gold imports for, roughly a full year, and dramatically lowered the amount of gold that was officially entering India during that time. It was forced to back off on that because it simply didn't work. But then a few months ago, we hear of this new, quote unquote, scheme that has been hatched in India. And basically, what India's government announced is that it was going to begin what in the English translation is called a gold deposit scheme, where all of India's legions of gold holders with their 18,000 tons or so of gold stashed around the nation are going to be invited to deposit their gold with the government, and then in return for that, the government will pay them interest. And of course, we've laughed about this before because it's just so ridiculous.
It is ridiculous.
For years and years and years, the bankers have told us over and over again, gold generates no income. Well, of course, very clearly, it's impossible to pay interest on something that generates no income if you're involved in any sort of legitimate business transaction. So the simple fact that they're announcing a gold deposit scheme where they're going to pay interest is proof that this is fraud. That
Yes.
There's no way it can be anything other than that. So, when it was first announced, I laughed. Ha ha ha, this is, some desperation move that could never possibly succeed. And then, of course, a few months later, I choked on that laughter when I got reports out of India that this was proceeding and that there was a lot of enthusiasm amongst the Indian population and India's temples to give away their gold.
Give away their gold, which is exactly what would happen. They would never see it again.
Well, of course not. And I mean, it's just like the people that are in the paper gold market in the West, and we laugh at them all the time. Ha ha ha, plunking down their money for this paper certificate and thinking it represents gold, when of course the bankers are laughing even harder. But, now we see, all this gold in India and the bankers just, doing a variation on their old, paper for gold Ponzi scheme theft. And of course, the Indians who are new to these sorts of crimes are apparently just only too happy to line up and get fleeced. And then, of course, this leads us back to Gold War. Imagine you're China and Russia, and you see what the bankers are trying to do in India. And let's just play out an imaginary conversation between, a conference call. Let's say a conference call between China, Russia, and the Rothschilds. And you've got those two, Putin and China's leader sitting on the line with Rothschild, and the Rothschild saying, ha ha, we're going to steal all the gold from India, and there's nothing you can do. And then China and Russia stare back, or assuming it's a video call, stare back and say, well, yes, there is something we can do. For every ounce of gold you steal from India, we're going to buy 1 ounce of gold on the open market. Then all of a sudden, who has the last laugh? Yes, the bankers can go around stealing all of India's gold, but they're not stealing it to keep it themselves. They're just stealing it to fill up their warehouses.
Right.
So, of course, as soon as it's in the warehouse, somebody can buy it. So this, for me, is what's going on right now. We have the big gold grab attempt in India. We have China and Russia extremely concerned about this. And we have China now overtly making a public move, entering the gold market, entering the international market, and buying gold internationally out of Western warehouses. And, this is something that's brand new. And so for me, I see a fairly, closely linked chain of events here. Certainly other people can interpret it differently. And the theory that I presented and you mentioned is also a plausible theory that, China could simply be looking to revalue gold. But, for me, this larger strategy seems to hold together and explain a lot of things all at once.
Well, and it would do several things. I mean, it would help both China and Russia to increase their gold hoards, which obviously they want to do, and it would keep all the gold that's in the East. It would keep it in the East, and it would just further. It would strengthen both China and Russia to the point where the West would lose even quicker.
Exactly. There would be a redistribution of gold, but it wouldn't be a redistribution out of India and into the West. It would be a redistribution out of the hands of private Indian citizens and into the vaults of the governments of Russia and China.
Exactly.
And that's the trend that would obviously horrify Western bankers.
Yes, because the bankers, even though they come on TV or whatever, they send out these memos, that gold is not money. Bernanke made that statement to Dr. Ron Paul a couple of years ago when Dr. Ron Paul asked him point blank, is gold money? And he stammered and had the deer in the headlights and said no. And it's like, well, that's a lie. And you know it, and we know it. And when they, make those comments, like you said a minute ago, called it a barbarous relic, we know that they account for gold as money on their books, period. Yeah. If they didn't, there wouldn't be central banks around the world that have vaults full of gold, period.
Well, and the point is that when our governments state their quote unquote reserves or capital reserves, it's all of their paper currencies and all of their gold. Right. And of course, and the important thing here, the U.S. government actually went and changed its record keeping several years ago to totally eliminate all distinction between its currency reserves and its gold reserves. Now, of course, the motivation for that was to make it easier to hide the fact it doesn't have any gold.
Right.
But of course, on the surface at least, it makes it even more official that gold is money. It's totally interchangeable, and anything ever said to the contrary by any banker is a deliberate and overt lie. Greenspan, back when he was still a professor before he became the chairman of the Fed, saying that gold is the only protection from the confiscation of wealth via inflation.
And there you have it.
And that was what Greenspan was saying before he sold his soul to the bankers and became their slave. And of course, you never heard that again from him. But we know that's what he really believes. And it's the story with all of these bankers. They say one thing to the public, they believe something totally different, and of course act in that manner privately.
Now, back on October 29th, 2014, this is what he said in a meeting with the CFR, I believe it was. I can't remember, the IMF. And this is a direct quote. Intrinsic currencies like gold and silver are acceptable without a third-party guarantee, end quote. And to which I commented, did Greenspan just say gold and silver are currency? Gold serves as a very important place in monetary reserves. That's another direct quote from him. So he's telling us on October 29th, 2014, that gold and silver are both currency, and that gold serves a very important place in monetary reserves, period.
Well, and the thing about statements like this, we get them from time to time from these bankers, and it's partly a matter of plausible deniability. What we have with our revisionist corporate media is we have the official propaganda line that we get day after day and, blurted out at maximum decibels, 100 times a day. And then, mixed in with this, every once in a while, we get these much quieter statements from these officials where they come close to acknowledging the truth. And of course, those statements are never splashed on the headlines and repeated a million times at maximum decibels. Those the statements only come out once. They're whispered by the corporate media and then never seen again. And of course, the other side of it is that a lot of these statements, while they say a lot, what they say is only going to be understood by people who have already spent a lot of time and effort in learning the lingo of the world of international finance and thus understand what's implied with these statements. So, of course, when Greenspan says, well, gold and silver are currency, which is not beholden to any counterparty, the average person doesn't understand the significance of this. All of our fiat currencies, their wealth is totally dependent upon outside entities. It's dependent upon the quote unquote the full faith of the U.S. government in the case of the U.S. dollar, or all of these other ridiculous, euphemistic, smoke and mirror explanations that don't really amount to anything. You're basically putting your wealth into a Ponzi scheme, because that's what all fiat currencies are. Ever since China invented the first paper fiat currency 1,000 years ago, they always collapse to zero. They're moved before they can collapse to zero because they're by definition a form of fraud. So this is the thing. You can allow your wealth to be stored in paper instruments that are inherently fraudulent and will always go to zero, or you can have your wealth outside of that system of fraud where it's protected and safe in the eternal value of gold and silver metal, which cannot be debauched by a banker.
Hear, hear. So I can't imagine that they're going to start turning in their gold for pieces of paper. I mean, I may be wrong, but.
And that was exactly how I was thinking myself, which is why, of course, I laughed when the scheme was first announced. But, of course, gold and wealth in India is very, very closely tied into social status.
Yes.
And when you do that, you make greed a cultural aspect of the psyche.
Okay.
It's like, if I want to rise in this society, I need more wealth. And of course, it's always been thought of as more gold, but basically it's just more wealth. They equate wealth with gold. So what Indians think very consciously is, my status is dependent on how much wealth I have. So when the bankers offer to pay interest on their gold. This was a way that Indians could become more wealthy without even doing anything. Their gold wasn't working for them. It was just sitting there, and looking beautiful. And of course, this is all that gold is supposed to do, to protect wealth. But that they got greedy. That was no longer enough for them. They forgot why they were holding the gold in the first place. The bankers dangled their interest in front of them, and they aroused the greed of Indians, and that's what is motivating this campaign. And of course, but when I look at this Eastern attitude towards precious metals, I think back to an anecdote going back to, I think, as far back as 2009. I saw this clip out of Indonesia. And something that probably very few of your audience is aware of is that the nation of Indonesia reintroduced I think it was a gold coin into its economy. It might have been a silver coin, but I think it was a gold coin. And as a parallel currency, exactly what Hugo Salinas Price has been trying and failing to do in Mexico with silver for many years now. But they did it in Indonesia. And so I was listening to this clip discussing this new gold currency in Indonesia, and they were interviewing an Indonesian peasant. And the Indonesian peasant was explaining why it was better for him to put his wealth into that gold currency than into Indonesia's paper currency.
Wow.
And so, this for me was the ultimate dichotomy between East and West. We have the supposedly sophisticated West where everybody knows that gold is just a barbarous relic and silver is beneath contempt. And then we have the East where even the peasants can explain why it's more sensible to put your wealth into precious metals than paper. So, this explains, the brainwashing in the West, the deliberate indoctrination and mythology that we've been brainwashed with versus what humanity used to always know. It's not like what they know in the East, something that we never knew ourselves. We used to know it here as well.
Yes.
But we were brainwashed to forget it. So something that even the peasants of Asia still know has been passed down to them, for hundreds and thousands of years, we have now forgotten, and it's going to cost us dearly.
It is going to cost us. And it's unfortunate, but there are some that do remember, there are some that do know, and there are others still that are re-educating themselves to the truth, and that's why we do this. That's why you and I and the other people that are doing this, that's why we do it, is to remind people of what you already know. I mean, and don't allow these banking scum to convince you otherwise, that you don't know this. You do know it, and you just have to be reminded that you know it. So, but with that, Jeff, I think we've covered quite a bit of ground here, and hopefully we can do this again pretty soon. And maybe we should check back in about 3 or 4 weeks when the next or the international gold trade, and see where China stands.
That sounds like a great plan, Rory. I'll either be taking a bow or eating some crow.
Well, either way, we'll know. I mean, I don't think there's any crow that'll need to be served. I think that I think that you're on the right track, and I think that it'll be very, very interesting to see what happens, because if that does in fact happen, then I believe that your two-prong attack that you've described will be in full play, and it'll be in full view.
And of course, that's really what's important. Is China now coming out of the closet? It's certainly not a matter of whether any one person, got things right, but this is a major event, and we really need to try to figure out what it means.
Exactly. So with that, we'll talk to you in a couple 3 weeks.
Sounds great.
All right, Jeff. Thank you so much.
Take care.
All right.